Hello, and welcome to Artpop Talk. I'm Gianna.
And I'm Bianca.
In today's episode of Artpop Talk, we are sitting down with friends Nebula and Wooper from their Nerdtastic Galaxy. We are so excited to have them on the podcast. They are college friends of mine and Bianca's, and we've been wanting to do this episode for such a long time, so it's very exciting that they're here today. Wooper and Nebula are lifelong friends, partners in crime, and gigantic nerds. Wooper is a miniature and model painter, Marvel lover, and aspiring voice actor who delves into story building and lore-based discussions through the galaxy. Nebula is a digital artist and designer who loves anime and graphic novels and online communities centered around fandom. She brings a more community-focused mindset to the show. The couple created Wooper and Nebula's Nerdtastic Galaxy in September of 2020 to gush about all these passions and more.
This was such a fun episode. We just finished recording with Wooper and Nebula, and I had so much fun. They're amazing. They're so smart. They're so much fun. I just loved it. I do want to let you guys know before you start listening that throughout the episode, there are mentions of bullying, sexual assault, and harassment that kind of take place minimally throughout the episode, but I did want to just give you guys a little trigger warning before you start listening. So we hope that you enjoy this conversation with Wooper and Nebula. And Gianna, let's get into it. Everyone, welcome back. We are here with two very good friends that we are so excited to finally have on the podcast, Wooper and Nebula from their Nerdtastic Galaxy podcast. Guys, welcome to Artpop Talk. We are so glad to finally have you on. Well, how are you both, first of all? But Nebula's voice may sound familiar as we've had her on the podcast before, but Wooper, welcome. And, we're so glad to give more names to the Art Pop Tarts and more creatives.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I am at best a Danish, but I appreciate this.
Does it count as multiple voices if I've been on before?
Yeah, totally.
Amazing.
Yeah, we're not a hive mind. We speak with two different voices.
There are two different people within Nebula, apparently. That's Artpop Talk lore now.
Ooh. I love that. Get a little mystical on the podcast today.
It's two fun gals talking about art and the eldritch god that they sometimes summon to also talk about art.
And the Danish.
Yeah,
named Wooper.
and I show up and I'm here and we love that.
I feel like...
You know what? I love a good Danish. I love those little, cream cheese-filled Danishes, so...
They removed them from Panera, and it's been my sort of Sisyphean curse.
Oh my
Wait,
gosh.
Why? Those things are so good.
I know, they're fantastic, and Mr. Panera has been getting a few sternly worded emails from me since.
Bianca, we used to eat one of those things every single day after high school.
Literally every day we'd go to Panera and do our homework, and I would have one of those every day.
When I went to the drive-thru and stuff, they'd always be like, "Would you like a pastry for 99 cents?" And I'd have to act all surprised, "Oh, well, don't mind if I do." Hey, you guys have those Danishes up in there though? And so they'd be like, "Yeah, sure, man." That's kind of how I did mine. That was the move I kind of did.
Okay, I like it. I'm on board.
Oh my gosh, I love it when we
you have the strudels and the tarts, and only exclusively the Danish. Or maybe the boys of APT can be the Danishes.
Oh, that's cute.
That's cute.
Because I know Andrew doesn't like Pop-Tarts, and he's always like, I'm a strudel. Whatever.
Andrew's wrong, so...
Pop-Tarts are good as hell. I don't know what to tell them.
Dude, that's what I'm saying. But I like Danishes. I could get on board with a subgroup a boy
a
version.
subgroup of Danish boys. And once again, everything comes back to prepackaged food for us.
So what I'm hearing is new Danish sticker design. Making note of it.
Ooh.
Yes. It's actually just Wooper's face.
Yes. It's just a Wooper with the helmet on.
It's just a Pokemon eating a lovely pastry. We love to see it. We love to see it.
Well, on that note, speaking of things we love to see, I want you all to tell us about your podcast and why you think that our listeners, the Art Pop Tarts, even the Strudels, and now all the Danish boys, will also find it useful in relation to visual and pop culture.
Yeah, our podcast is all about nerd culture and how Wooper and I in particular came involved in nerd culture and how it's kind of permeated our lives moving forward. And I think that it's pretty reminiscent of how you both grew up around artwork and this whole creative mindset. And we want to kind of join those in a semi-academic way of talking about the implications on our lives, on our peers, on society, on the way that we even consume pop culture and nerd culture in general. And I think that we can definitely marry those two, especially after your more recent episodes that I listened to earlier about WandaVision that I would love to talk about. But yeah, I really think that we just kind of mirror each other on different ends of that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you guys grew up around, art and internalized that, and then we sort of grew up around Halo 3 and internalized that. So, you can see the through line there is nice and consistent. But, we want to break down nerd culture. We want to provide a, sort of a fast and loose summary of different things when we can and give people just kind of a jumping on point if they've been too intimidated or, by the vast amount of geek stuff that's out there. And we also just kind of want to talk about our experiences in that sphere, in that social area, and kind of provide an outlet for the absolutely haunting early stages of our life where we didn't know what was happening, like middle school. And we don't talk about that.
It always comes back to middle school with us, I feel like.
POV, you're in middle school and getting into nerd culture and you're at your locker
This is the worst
and you're
video I've ever found on Pornhub. I hate this. I'm clicking away. I'm leaving.
Middle school
We're 5 minutes
intimidation.
in and you've embarrassed me.
Excellent.
Goal accomplished.
Perfect. We've done it, boys. Yeah, I mean that's what we want to do. We want to talk about, our experiences. We want to talk about what we're doing in nerd culture, and we want to, if we're critiquing, reviewing something, we want to do that. But we also just want to make people feel validated,
Mm-hmm.
So if you couldn't get into something, maybe one of us could be like, yeah, and I also didn't like that. And then if you are wicked into something and you've always felt, a little bit on the fringe, then you can kind of feel a little kinship with us because we were both idiots and still are. At least I am. I can't speak for Nebula. She's smarter than I am.
I just need to say that I'm obsessed with Nerdtastic Galaxy. I love it so much. And, Gianna and I have kind of talked about this before, but we grew up in a very specific, arts-based environment. And Nebula, you have taught me so much just in our previous time together in school about all of these things that are so relatable to the art world that were totally oblivious to me. And I just love listening every week. And I also need to say that Wooper cracks me up every single time. There's always something where I'm texting Nebula. I'm like, I can't believe he said that. This was the funniest thing I heard. Every week, I'm just dying. I love it so much. But I think the concept is so fascinating, like we were talking about earlier in relationship to ours, because narrowing in on these words like nerd, pop, visual culture, it's all really just culture. And so I'm kind of wondering how you guys specifically define nerd culture, because this is something that, we've talked about specifically with defining this loose term that is pop for Artpop Talk's sake.
I think that honestly anything within the realm of which is kind of a weirdly dirty word now of just nerd, is storytelling, is what it boils down to. And that's the essence of pretty much all art, and the reason that humans even created art is storytelling and appreciation of something that we couldn't create without trying to find that story within ourselves in a way. And like when you're a kid, you watch super bright animated movies, you read all these fantastical novels, and like, why do you stop doing that when you get older? Why is it suddenly considered not appropriate, or like you're not acting your age for you being interested in something fantastical that's beyond your 9 to 5 and your little gray cube? And I think that that's kind of where nerd culture festers, is this idea of being an othered, but still wanting to engage in something that really does project like that fantastic creativity that's beyond what you would consider in like an art museum or something, which is also, Bianca, why I think you and I bonded so much whenever we worked on the exhibition for Little Nemo. It's that same kind of concept of, maybe I am into this, maybe I can get into this, and maybe I don't have to act like a boring adult 24/7, and I can just rant about this movie, or I can rant about this comic book, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
And talk about those things and find those types of exhibitions within a contemporary setting. Like sometimes I worry so much about what people think like contemporary art is and like what they're experiencing. And when I think of something like cosplay and those amazing and fantastical exhibitions, like that translates so well to types of environments that Bianca and I talk about on the pod.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I respect that for sure. It's such a weird thing to define. Like, I mean, you talking about pop culture, right? We all kind of have a definition that we think of in our head, but it's different from person to person. And so when nerd culture is kind of define that, it's so odd because we each and every one of us has what we consider to be nerd culture in our head, whether that be Pokemon or, you know, a card game like Yu-Gi-Oh, or maybe it's just a TV show, or but we all have something that we consider to be nerd culture, and that is what's the most fascinating to me. It's stuff that's not, I don't know, commonly valuable or productive to society. Like sports kind of offer a value, they offer a physical sort of accomplishment, and then they provide a common ground in the workplace for many people. And this is the kind of same idea, but it's what's rejected by society. And I mean, so anything can become nerd culture at any time, just depending on what falls out of vogue.
Yeah.
I won't kind of, we've talked about WandaVision. I won't make this a whole podcast about it, but I mean, to me, the MCU, I think, is possibly the best thing to happen to nerd culture. You have just an absolute bacchanal of the world's most popular D-list superheroes that have now become household names. Captain America, Hulk, Iron Man, Black Widow, Hawkeye. Like, these are people that you would not have given a second thought back in the halcyon days of 2004. But, you know, today they are, like, you can bring that name up and somebody knows who Ant-Man is. That's not something that would have happened a while ago. And that's insane to me. It's so cool. When I was a kid, I was really into Iron Man. I liked him a lot. And I didn't have a lot of other kids who even knew who he was. I could describe him and somebody might go, yeah, I kind of think I know who that is. But most of the other kids didn't know who that superhero was. So now that's very validating to me to have those movies come out and to have everybody around me be able to have an experience, whether, you know, that made them laugh or cry or storm out of the theater because they didn't like the movie. There's now a common ground that I can find with everybody. It's so super validating. And
I think it also kind of echoes in the realm of art, because like I'm also an artist, and I also have a similar background to you guys with art history and like classical training, for lack of better terms. But like, you can't walk into your office and be like, guys, I saw this awesome Francis Bacon painting over the weekend. No one's gonna care. But you can say like, oh, I saw like a Roy Lichtenstein, and someone will know what it is.
Right.
Or like, or I saw Jackson Pollock, but I saw Jackson Pollock, and like, that's, yeah, someone's gonna recognize it. So now we're kind of breaching into that territory with nerd culture, which is why I think the nerd part of it is sort of falling away from what we've known it traditionally.
Well, what you guys are saying leads into my next question, which is about WandaVision. We don't have to spend too much time on it, but I am really interested in this idea of a quote unquote nerd culture where sometimes it has these kind of dualities that feel like very inclusive but very exclusive at the same time. So we just did an episode on comics and WandaVision, and I know that you all did as well. And you also just did a recap of the Snyder Cut, which I was just cackling at because I'm not going to subject myself to that. I already did Justice League, and that's about enough for me.
Bianca, guess what? Guess what? Yours truly sat down, and I watched the whole thing. Can you believe it?
I'm so sorry.
Truly can't.
We watched
I
6
echo Wooper.
hours
I'm
of it, so you
so
guys
sorry.
didn't have to.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
This is our cross to bear.
I'm so impressed, though, G. I'm so impressed.
Well, I
that
was
you watched it.
coerced by the people I cohabitate with. So why I work on Artpop Talk, they get to control what's on TV for that night, and I just roll with
You
it.
must have been very
hate to see it.
productive. APT for 4 hours.
Oh my gosh, it was wild. But can you believe it that I watched it?
I'm very impressed. Well, I just want to ask you guys. Okay, so excluding myself, because I'm just not going to. You all three have enjoyed, quote unquote, these kind of mass viewing experiences, and I think it's interesting that you guys knew it was going to be bad. I knew it was going to be bad. But yet all of these people are still kind of watching the Snyder Cut at the same time. So I am wondering if you could tell us, like, what do these mass viewing experiences mean? They take place across all these different kinds of communities, including nerd culture, pop culture, arts and visual culture, cinema, film history. So what does it mean that these kind of networks are becoming integrated into popular language? We're seeing them on social media. We're seeing them on TikTok. They're becoming, headlines and all these different news outlets. What does it mean when it feels like it's kind of generated from nerd culture with something like WandaVision and the Snyder Cut?
Well, I think it's really cool that you asked that, because the entire time that we were watching the Snyder Cut specifically, I was thinking about and I can't remember his name now, but the animator that came to the Little Nemo
Lyndon
Yes.
Barwa.
Yes, and he has worked as an animator with Zack Snyder before. And I think he worked on Sucker Punch, which is my favorite Snyder movie, and is a horrible movie from film standards. But the CGI is pretty good for the year it came out, and that's all that was in the back of my head. So I'm thinking, while consuming this traditional nerd media that's on a widely accepted platform now, I'm thinking about the classical art origins that are also laid within that, which is so strange that you not strange, but I guess just wonderfully coincidental that you formed this question around this whole circle that we've all been a part of the entire time.
Right.
And it's really weird being the kid that was bullied for being into all of this kind of stuff, and then 10-15 years later everything that you liked or that you wanted to talk about is now headlines and is now the subject of people's blogs. They're what they talk about at the dinner table. Every little aspect of their life has been permeated by something that for the longest time we couldn't make friends over kind of deal.
Right.
So that's also a interesting added layer to it. And I know Wooper had a very different experience than I did when it came to this kind of source material and growing up with it. So for me, it's been this marriage of two completely separate worlds. That it's weird now that my dad said, yeah, I watched Birds of Prey. My 60-year-old Southern dad who loves football was like, yeah, I watched this. I watched the movie about Harley Quinn, and she wears booty shorts the whole time, and I didn't really get it, but good for her, I guess. Who are you? So it's just jarring, I guess, is the only real answer for me. Is it doesn't feel like the world has changed as much as it has, and then you take a step back and look at all the years of the MCU and all this new DC stuff, and it truly has just been absorbed into a badge of honor almost. What Andrew was saying, he'd seen every Marvel film at the midnight premiere, And if he had said that 10 years ago, people would be like, screw you, dude. Get a
Right.
life.
You sat through Ghost Rider 2?
Exactly. And now it's like, oh, that's awesome. I can't believe you did that. That's such a cool thing to do.
Right.
So, I mean, does it have a meaning? Yeah. Do I know what that is? Absolutely the fuck not.
Well, that's how I feel about every conversation on Artpop Talk. I am almost always split exactly down the middle, and it comes out as gibberish because I don't know how to sort out my feelings about it, which is exactly how I feel about WandaVision when I take a closer look at it.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, I respect that.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
I can feel that on a spiritual level. It's all good.
I think that when it boils down to it, though, I'm really glad that this kind of media is becoming accepted. Like, I'm very glad that there is, like, my nieces will grow up in a world where Wonder Woman from 2017 was not an earth-shattering thing. Like, that will be the norm.
Yes. That brings my heart a lot of joy.
Yes, and that goes hand in hand with so many other things also in pop culture where, like, there's so much more representation, there's so much more acceptance around so many things, but in particular, the characters that made me feel powerful as a kid will not be, like, brought to their knees over these asshole children that just want to say, you're different, fuck you. And I'm glad that other kids will not experience that I did, or that people, like, much older than us in the 80s that were reading X-Men comics at recess will have. Like, their grandkids will be able to proudly talk about whatever they're interested in and not be shunned by their peers, which I think is probably the biggest impact that all of this is nobody's getting ostracized anymore for these kinds of interests.
Yeah, that's a big point. One thing that I loved when I first saw it was the comparison of Infinity War to Empire Strikes Back. And I think that has a lot of truth to it, because when Empire Strikes Back first came out, you had this, sprawling space opera epic that ends on a very bittersweet note for its heroes. We find out that, some of our guys made it out, but Han Solo frickin' died probably. And also, Darth Vader's his dad. What? And so, that kind of took the nation in the world by storm. We see Star Wars today as an absolute media juggernaut because of the impact it had back then. And Infinity War is in much the same vein. It's a very bitter note before the climax of a sprawling cinematic epic that began with Jon Favreau's Iron Man and has now ended with Endgame and is still continuing today. It is fascinating to me. I can't wait for when my grandchildren come up to me and they say, I think Ant-Man looks hokey, and I'm like, yeah, it'll be cool to see what's going on in the future because we had what we had today.
Yeah.
Which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking about just in particular this impact of each individual character, I loved a conversation that you all had some episodes back about character design and its effects on pop culture and particularly gender stereotypes. Speaking from my own experience with nerd culture, or specifically something like anime, as a highly visual person, that was always something that turned me off from diving into the substance of, I think, characters in like an animated sense, because I use visual impressions to like deter me from other forms of investigation. For me, though, at this point of like curiosity, like I was a young adult, not a kid anymore, who surprisingly just wasn't influenced by video games or anime because I didn't have access to them in the home, which I know is kind of maybe like an abnormal experience for someone my age. But I'm curious about your relationship or awareness of the gendering in these particular actions or roles or appearances of certain characters when you all were young.
And I want to add on top of that, you guys just had another conversation about superheroes and things like that as well. So I do want to add, especially since we were also just talking about WandaVision last week, add superheroes and comics and what that in turn looked like on screen as well into that mix.
I want to take the reins for a second.
I wasn't using them. That's fine.
Cool. Specifically in reference to something like anime, which is also like kind of awkward to talk about in certain spaces because it does have such heavy like sexualized tones, and there's several series that are like strictly for a sexual consumption or a male gaze, and then there's other series that are just batshit crazy that have nothing to do with the expected kind of concept of how something would be animated or how these characters would be designed. It's so hard to tell someone, oh, I'm interested in anime, and them not immediately jump to like the creepy, like overly sexualized teenage girl in the tiny little school uniform and then some loser like ogling at her, because that's kind of the general mindset of something like that.
The classic, oh, I'm into anime. Oh, so you like hentai? What? No. What? No.
Yeah.
No. What?
But what's also like weirdly interesting about it is that because that exists as a unfortunately large concept of like different series within anime and manga being the printed form of it, it's like bouncing back for female fans. There's so many more female fans that are saying, okay, well, screw these series. We're going to give more credence to things that explore what it means to be disabled in a war zone, or like what it means to be thrown into an entirely new culture and have to essentially scramble for your own survival. Like very deep identity crisis kind of stories that are now becoming much more popular as the years go on, which is also hand in hand to the superhero thing. When I was younger, I was introduced, unfortunately, to hypersexualized anime, which made me feel like I couldn't talk about it. And then as I've gotten older, I've gotten so much more into stories that delve into very deep topics that other media don't necessarily touch on in a respectful way, or they'll talk about it for the shock value. And then, like, being in college, like, we were all in college when Wonder Woman came out.
Yeah.
And then to have that realization of, oh my god, I don't have to sit through the same shit that I did as a kid, and no other little girl will. And that is a cycle, I think, that is very hand in hand with what's becoming popular not only here in America at the moment, but what has historically been popular in more Eastern media that has made its way to the West. And that's also evolving. And it's frustrating that it was born of this hypersexualization. And it sucks being a female fan involved in that because you want to distance yourself from that. But it's also like a very artistically beautiful medium when it breaks down to all the processes that go into the traditional aspect and now the more digital aspect of the animation and the storytelling. And it's also like fandom itself, the very concept of it was invented by women. And any time that something got popular, it was co-opted by young men. Classic example is the Beatles. Like, the Beatles would not be popular if it weren't for screaming 16-year-old girls. It just wouldn't. And
This
Star
is
Trek
because women drive the market. Dun, dun,
Exactly.
dun.
Freaking preach.
And it's the, like, we're the catalyst when it comes to launching these creative things oftentimes, and then it becomes thus more socially acceptable whenever men get a hold of it. And that's when it blows up. And it's the same thing with anime. It's the same thing with superheroes and comic books. And, you know, like, it was historically the same thing with a lot of classic rock and, like, Star Trek. Star Trek was the origin of all fandom, as Wooper and I discuss in our podcast. And it was all women that formulated it. The first convention, the concept of cosplay, the concept of fan fiction, all young women that are, like, our age that would literally write letters to the actors and say, will you come to this, like, get together? We want to talk to you and ask questions about the story and ask questions about the set and how you guys recorded this. And it just made history from there. And that's where we are at this moment. And it's frustrating to know the reality of, we started this and then we're getting fed back media that degrades us.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that's like to be interested, like to watch a show, maybe even like Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball, or maybe the original, right? Where you have a protagonist woman who is awesome. Bulma's great. We love her. She's spunky and she's funny, and
And she's a scientist.
And
That's
she's
important.
she's smart, and she's a scientist, and she's kind of the onus for the whole trip in the original story, and then also have to be subjected to scenes, where a old man ogles her and wants to feel her up.
The most popular scene of this character, she's the teal-haired girl from all the Dragon Ball stuff, if you guys are familiar. The most popular scene for her from the original series is the lead character Goku being confused as to like what she is, and she lifts her dress to show panties as like part of the context of the scene. Like that's the most popular scene for this character, and she is the most intelligent, rich, and powerful woman basically in the whole world in Dragon Ball canon.
Yeah.
She is an amazing engineer and scientist and like a super strong-willed woman, and that is the most popular aspect of it, is this like cheeky little scene where she's like, look, I have underwear on. What the fuck is that?
Gross.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just so interesting in itself, but that really does bring me to my next question. As we just talked about this gendering that happens to characters in relation to the market, I think now the gendered spaces and constructs that, like, for example, take place in a toy aisle. When you take like a feminist theory class, that's one of the first things that you talk about, and something like the pink theory. And especially when I think about this in relationship to really beloved and historic characters and female characters like She-Ra or Wonder Woman, as you guys have mentioned on the pod. But do you think that now, like, we notably question or are acknowledging the intent and the evolution of these figures? Because I myself, I think, go back and forth, because we just see these really wonderful things happening with Wonder Woman, but then like we have some interesting things happening in WandaVision, and also don't even get me started on Black Widow,
Which may or may not come out.
Yeah.
Right.
Still not convinced, Dibney.
So I know that like Wooper and I both have large figure collections and like grew up around that kind of collector mindset of the toys that were involved with the lore. Like we have literally Dragon Ball figures behind Wooper's head.
Yeah,
while
I
we're
did. I
recording.
did think you were just going to end the sentence, "We just have large figures," and I was about to be like, "What? How could you do this to me on the podcast?"
But like in the context of children's toys, how we've seen historically with shows like She-Ra or He-Man or like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Transformers, it's been the battle is in the toy aisle, and it's always for the little boys.
Yep.
Now with shows that are really popular with kids like OKKO, there's a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles reboot,
great.
Gravity Falls, The Owl House. They're not really producing toys as we historically know them, and they're definitely not marketing them in a gendered way, which is a good leap forward. And it seems like there's much more of a focus on how do we tell these stories to kids, and how do we engage with them and make them feel appreciated and also not like idiots. Like, you can't talk down to kids' media forever, because it will ultimately shape who they become. And I think that we're finally moving towards that and moving away from this kind of gendered toy aisle concept, which is great. It's a double-edged sword, though, because, like, again, Wooper and I collect a lot of figures that are marketed towards adults, and it's a lot of, like, okay, how many sexy poses can we put these characters in for the female characters, and then how many cool, like, posable joints can we give the male ones so you can put them in these awesome action poses. So it's kind of a cycle that the kids that grew up seeing the gendered toys are now being marketed at an adult range of, well, you can still have them and we'll just make them sexier. So it is a double-edged sword. Like, the kids aren't so much as exposed to that as we were, but it's kind of biting us in the ass full force when it comes to still being a part of that community as an adult.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by shows, I guess show like Gravity Falls, because it is not a show that fought in the toy aisles at all. There probably have been a few. I mean, we're talking about a Disney show, so, but what it did to engage its audience was, rather than pump out just pointless merch. And look, it's a hat that you can wear, and it spits out bubblegum sometimes. Like, instead of that, it decided to engage its audience, primarily children, by providing cryptograms for them to solve at the end of each episode. At the beginning and end of each episode, there is a voice that speaks backwards, and that gives you either information on the show's story to come, or it gives you a cipher key, and there's a cipher at the end of every episode, and so that key can be used to solve that cipher. That's how it engaged its audience. It provided codes and clues and mysteries rather than toys, which is what we've seen in the past, which I think is fascinating. We don't see enough shows like that, where it knew its audience was children, and it still actively encouraged participation, not just from children, but from adults too. But that kind of stuff would be wildly encouraging to me as a kid if I were watching that.
That's really cool. It's been really interesting to hear you guys talk about how visuals on screen are particularly chosen because of the merch impact they will have later on. So I think that's a really also interesting aspect to just design and creation of art, like design and creation of our visual world, like thinking about the impact this has on like film history and things like that, just feeding back into like capitalistic tendencies. It's like, oh man, like
Bianca, do you know what I'm thinking this whole time is
what?
Be sure to drink your Ovaltine.
I was
crummy commercial. Son of a bitch.
That's also what I was thinking of when Wooper was explaining the ciphers, because it's literally that, but it's like,
but good.
But we all saw that scene and thought, that's horrible. Let's make it better, and then just created Gravity Falls.
Let's learn from Ralphie's story.
We must learn from our sins.
It's very true. But also,
yo, I love Ovaltine though. I have some Ovaltine like right up here on my fridge. Like I would drink that Ovaltine, and if I was a kid, I'd be like, "Fuck yeah!" Like I'm gonna go buy some Ovaltine.
I'm already drinking Ovaltine.
You guys
never had Ovaltine. Don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
We're gonna send you guys some instead of APT merch as a thank you.
Heck yeah, I respect that.
I will accept it.
I'd chug some male juice,
some Ovaltine, and then you can dip your Pop-Tarts in it.
Ooh, that's probably good or not.
Dip your Danish in it.
That would be pretty tasty, or maybe it won't.
Before we run away from this topic, I want to point out what you guys said with the character design thing in particular. And I know we've harped on this in a previous episode, but She-Ra has such a special place in my heart.
It's so good.
Because if you look at the 80s cartoon, the women's body types are quite literally traced, copied, and pasted for every single character. And they're just color palette swaps, and a few things are changed, so they didn't have to change too much in the toy production line.
Wow.
But they all use the same stock standard body and face, because if they did it that way, they don't have to change the mold for the plastic. They can use the same mold and just keep using the same mold over and over and over again.
That is fascinating.
And just give the figure different colored dresses or different colored hair, and then provide some extra accessories. But
right.
it keeps production costs down.
Swap out the color of the plastic. So this one has pink skin and this one has green skin, but it's the same damn mold.
Right.
So what's really cool is that the reboot is made by a queer artist, first off, and they identify as non-binary. And they talk about, all their Twitter is how much they love their wife. Just straight up.
So cute.
Noelle, marry me.
Their name is Noelle Stevenson. And they're also a graphic designer and a graphic novelist prior to being a showrunner. Cool. And all of these characters are their bodies are so diverse. The skin tones are so diverse. It's still mostly in light color palettes for the heroes and darker tones for the villains. But the characters themselves breach so much gray area that you kind of forget about who is on what side and why that matters. And it looks absolutely nothing like what you would expect. And I think that because we're moving in that positive and progressive, developmental stages, I guess, of the show, we don't have to think about the literal mold anymore.
Yeah.
And honestly, you couldn't. You couldn't mass produce those toys in an effective, quote unquote, capitalistic effective manner because of how different these shows are. And that's a damn good thing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
That's awesome. So this conversation reminds me of an artist that we've talked about before, Rokutan Ashiko, and alongside that, Takashi Murakami. And they're both Japanese artists who play on this type of character building. And I think that they echo these kind of kawaii themes and characters. Obviously these gendered and problematic elements of visual culture that we've kind of been talking about as well. So I'm wondering what kind of echoes in nerd culture do you see taken from artists like these two as an example, and how they've maybe, been viewed within nerd culture, or if any kind of like backlash or conversation surrounding this kind of a response of nerd culture in quote unquote high art scenarios.
So personally, I really like Rokutan Ashiko, and I think that she really just gives Yoko Ono a run for her money when it comes to performative art.
I love Yoko Ono.
I love her so much. But Rokutan Ashiko is so good.
I'm just gonna be quiet.
Do not come for my girl, Yoko.
I shan't besmirch the host's wishes on this their podcast.
I really think that we should just open up every APT episode with her vocal throat performance at the MoMA, because that is iconic.
You're gonna make Wooper walk out of this tiny closet that we recorded.
All I can think of is fucking Johnny Be Good, performed by Chuck Berry, John Lennon, and Yoko Ono. Have you guys seen that video? Oh my God. It's hysterical because so Chuck Berry's like excited he's going to play with one of the Beatles. Oh, whoa, cool. And so then John Lennon gets up there and, he can't sing for literally anything. So, John and Chuck are kind of up there doing their thing, and you can kind of tell in Chuck's face it's not really going the way he thought it would go. But that's fine. He's making do. And all of a sudden, Yoko, who is just kind of playing the tambourine, and that was just kind of her role, just kind of sticks her snoot in and just goes right up to the mic, just starts going, right into the mic. And it cuts back to Chuck Berry, and his eyes almost come out of his skull because it's a live performance on a talk show. It is hysterical.
That's my girl.
And she keeps...
Okay, so Rokutan Ashiko.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry.
I don't know if you are familiar with her, Wooper, or if any of the listeners are, but
very vaguely.
So the number one piece that I know her from, I actually learned about like years and years ago, that she did a 3D scan of her vulva and then 3D printed it onto a kayak and kayaked with it in like a rowing area, and she was arrested for it. Yeah. Even though from a distance, like, you can't tell shit. Like, you don't. It's just a kayak.
Also, who cares? It's just a vulva. Like, calm down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's a really cool commentary on like how hypersexual Japanese media is and Japanese culture in general, and that women kind of fit into a dichotomy, or are expected to fit into a dichotomy in Japan, where you're either like this cute young thing, or you're over the age of 22 and you should strictly dress in business casual and should be looking for a husband. And that's pretty much what is traditionally accepted. Obviously things are progressing now, but that's still a mindset that a lot of generations within Japan hold true. And to do something like that and to be arrested for it kind of proves her whole point. Right. I can't even do this, and I can't even own my body in a way that is not sexual and is not like breaching anyone else's privacy or problems. It's not causing a big stir. You're not throat singing live on television. You're just rowing down a damn river. And that's a problem, apparently. So I think that that's also very reminiscent of the way that like Westerners have kind of just inhaled Japanese media while ignoring the problems within the production of Japanese media. And it's also very like commercial in a way that you don't want to think about. Like, women's bodies are commercialized so heavily in Japanese media and in American media, and we both just like choose to ignore that fact so we can look at the fun stuff. So I really like how her art stands out in that, and it does mirror the way that weebs like me just want to read their damn manga and don't want to think about how horrible a lot of that culture is. But it's absolutely necessary to both consume the media and criticize the media.
Yeah.
In the West, or at least predominantly in America, for bachelorette parties, there's this weird culture around like, get penis confetti, get a penis cake. Like, no man is going to a bar and saying, guys, look at my vulva cupcakes. Like, that's not a thing.
They should.
To be fair, the bachelor parties are getting dick and balls cakes as well. So I think
that's
it's just
also a
I think it's
problem.
just a party thing.
But that's also a problem because then that sets like the quote unquote default as male.
Yes.
So
yes.
it's just really cool to think about how you are like taught and raised and internalized those concepts. And then whenever we are forced to view it in society, it's considered high art when a guy that draws a dick on the side of a wall in public is just like, haha, look at this asshole.
God.
It's so strange, and it is definitely mirrored in like all points of cultures, both here and there.
See, I'm just trying to get a slice of this grundle cake, and I'm not even realizing why it is the way it
grundle.
is. Yeah.
Also, similarly, Takashi Murakami is, you guys might have to Google this, or I can like send you this image, but his stuff looks so much like this video game called Katamari Damacy, which you both would love. It's just like very groovy, very 60s, 70s visuals, and it's all just super like upbeat and very nice music. And all you do is you play this funky little spaceman and you roll around and collect random things into a giant ball.
You're about
it.
a centimeter tall.
Yeah,
And you roll, and as the ball grows in size, you can get bigger stuff. That's the whole game.
and it's all just like very positive. It's like your dad's the king of the cosmos and he's proud of you, and it's time for you to start your own stuff, like go on your own adventure. And his work just gives me that feeling. Like Murakami's just like envelops me in that, oh, it's this whole universe of exciting and like fun and upbeat kind of aspects to it, and I enjoy that. But I also like how you can compare those two elements like almost pretty damn perfectly. They're very one for one in something that is not viewed as art, as like the context of video games.
I want to transition a little bit and let's talk about putting your own artistic take on pre-existing characters, kind of pivoting a little bit both to this other practice that you guys both partake in. Nebula is primarily a digital character artist, and Wooper works in modeling and character assemblage. And Wooper, please correct me if there is another appropriate term, but I want you guys...
seems correct.
I want you guys to walk us through the parameters of how you manipulate a character. When do you decide to completely like give a character a new setting or a makeover, or a makeover of sorts, I should say? And when do you depict the character in its original form while still having like that presence of your own style? Because this is something I see come up on like my Instagram all the time. Like somebody has their character and then people reproduce that in their style.
Yeah. I mean, so it's really interesting to apply this to what I paint, which is primarily, it's a game called Warhammer. That's where the characters are from. And it is one of the most freeing artistic experiences I've had because, at least in my opinion, the hard work is done for me. These are little dudes that have already been sculpted and the detail is already applied. All I have to do is put color on them. And so, and there's also, in addition to that, there's so much lore and history behind this Warhammer game for each and every one of the characters that exists in it. And so what I can do is I can pull from that lore and I can know exactly how to paint a guy. And there's also just a built-in way to just deviate from the norm and just do your own thing and explore the space. And that's very intimidating to me as an artist. It's hard to kind of stare down the barrel of do something new. And yet it's also an interesting challenge for me. It's about looking at what's already there and then deciding how can I separate myself from the tens of thousands of other Instagram posts and, YouTube channels that are about this painting. How can I make myself stand out if I even want to? that kind of stuff is where I find the most freedom. It's in that tiny, tiny little amount of detail that I get to add to the pre-existing sculpture.
Where you can,
it's fascinating.
Where you can add that narrative that you want. Yeah,
absolutely. The narrative, yes.
And that's your whole vibe. Like, Wooper, all of his art always comes back to lore and narrative and what's the story and what's the reason.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, you really just churn these miniatures out. Like, you paint them constantly.
I try.
And he has so many, like dozens now, that are painted and finished and look honestly like movie quality. Like, you could set them up in a Lord of the Rings thing and have like an overhead shot of these miniatures and have them translate to the screen as a whole enemy army. And that kind of concept fits with a lot of certain personalities. I think it's the people that want to be creative but are too afraid to color outside the lines.
Yeah.
And you even have an app on your phone that you can like test out all these color palettes on a particular model before you paint it, so you can work through all the narrative beforehand and then really get into the nitty-gritty of it.
It keeps me from wasting my very expensive paint.
Yes.
I can just be like, instead of stripping a model and wasting a bunch of that awesome purple paint, I can just say, I don't like that, and erase it.
But you, like, Wooper definitely has this whole really cool process to his character art and his character designs, because you're the one that's breathing all that life in. You just get the gray piece of plastic and you make all the executive decisions on it. I think that's really cool.
That's what's fun to me is being able to just take and make those executive decisions, that narrative. Nebula, so what about, I mean, like, what kind of, what do you kind of go through when you do digital art and character design?
I like to draw cute girls.
This is true.
That's basically it.
That's fair.
I mean, it's a lot of, it's really funny to like see on Twitter. I know you guys mentioned Instagram, and there's a lot of like draw this in your style challenge that Gianna mentioned, which is what a lot of artists are doing right now, which is kind of like, there's positives and negatives to it, but it's very trendy at the moment to be a digital artist, in the sense that you pretty much only grow a following if you follow the trends, and you pretty much only are able to sell your artwork or your stickers or your prints or anything like that if you either do fan art or if you follow literally every hashtag that exists and are involved in every challenge that there is. I've been in like 2 challenges and I hated my life both times because it's very limiting and it's also very intimidating. So I'm a very like dark aesthetic person. I enjoy horror movies. I enjoy the macabre. I enjoy that whole shit. And I love to draw in bright pink and purple just because I find enjoyment in it. And I think that if you're going to make art, you absolutely have a right to put your own meaning behind it, but you also absolutely have a right to put no meaning behind it and just to create whatever makes you happy. So I just like to create whatever I think would be cool to see in media, to create characters that I think would be interesting to be represented, or to create something that I would have wanted to see when I was a specific age, or something out of a specific aesthetic. Like, oh, I like cyberpunk concepts. Maybe I'll make a character like that, but put her in a queer spin, or in, like, maybe I'll do a black character that's not being seen as much when it comes to, like, more mainstream media and stuff. So I like representation, and I like drawing cute shit.
I mean, yeah, a lot of your stuff has these, bright and cute poppy colors, but a lot of your stuff also has these violent undertones to it, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I drew another podcaster that I really enjoy, and she's also like super into horror film history and like the feminist theory behind horror films and stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
So I drew her as Ghostface from Scream with a knife because that makes sense in my head, apparently.
Amazing.
It was very good, and I liked it.
But I also think that's cool that you and I have very different concepts of that, where you want to create the story and I just kind of want to create the aesthetics.
I think, kind of going off of that, Nebula, I just need to say that one of my favorite characters that you have drawn is like the monster woman, like the Miss Frankenstein.
Oh, thank you.
And then the cute girl with like the old school TV head.
Yes, I created her years ago, and I was really excited that I got to recreate her, and I want to revisit her. And I'm just stoked that she got reception because I thought that she looked kind of dumb at first.
She got reception.
But I love that like cute but also creepy aspect of like you don't know what's under that TV.
Well, when I saw those two images, just because I know you so well, both like personally and professionally, it was just such like a yes. Like I love this like hybridity of like these characters. I'm very here for it. But that kind of leads me to my next question, because I would be remiss if I didn't talk about monster theory with you guys. And I feel as though you guys could help us take monster theory a step further and discuss it in terms associated with nerd culture.
I think I'm just going to go bake some bread for the next 6 hours while y'all talk about this.
I actually have some bread in the
Okay.
oven right now. I'm really excited about it.
Okay.
I want some, bitch.
Some,
It's like what we talking about, like sourdough, like a...
some French bread.
Yum. Amazing.
I respect that. That is
Love it.
good. I like it.
So, monsters. I remember whenever we started writing the script for this episode, I was like, I'll try and keep it polite and be nice, and I am throwing that out the window because there is a concept online that is very prevalent at the moment, mostly through female fans. And I know, Gianna, you and I have had these conversations personally about like the concept of post-human bodies and feminist theory within this whole aspect. And there is like a giant community of what are affectionately referred to as monster fuckers. And yes, ma'am, I fall in this category. But it's more of like, it's back to the concept of the othered when it comes to a traditional nerd media. It's characters like the main characters in The Shape of Water, where it's this woman who is ostracized or who doesn't fit in or isn't like societally beautiful, and you find solace and compassion and comfort with another creature, so the story goes, that also faces these different kinds of hardships, but in a storytelling way, a completely visual manner. And so it's a cool juxtaposition of what are you feeling on the inside, and how does that like translate to you looking at yourself, or to you looking at those around you. A very PG explanation would be like Beauty and the Beast.
Right, I was gonna say like very like Beauty and the Beast theory-esque.
Absolutely. And the difference being with a lot of this like monster fucker community, it's not strictly sexual. It's more of just like a pretty vulgar term that's given to people that resonate with these like cryptozoologic stories. People that joke like, oh, I want Mothman to be my boyfriend.
Or the
Because
fact that
it's
like
this-
Simba is like really hot.
Exactly.
So, hey, are y'all getting... that's furries. Y'all are getting
Okay,
confused.
no, though, I was gonna ask though, where does furries fit in this conversation?
Well, so I actually like
An
think-
excellent question. We're both not furries. Sweet, sweet, sweet.
I think that they fall in a similar category because it's also a part of this post-human body concept of how do I view myself in a different light, but also I think it feeds into this metaphor of like, how do you view not only yourself, but a culture, society around you in that aspect. A traditional example would be like Disney's 1973 Robin Hood, with Robin Hood as the fox and Lil Jon as the
bear.
Is my dad.
Lil Jon the rapper, Little John the bear.
That would be a very different movie, though.
I said Lil Jon on reflex and not Little John, so I had to point it out.
Two different guys.
Little John, the giant bear. And it's concepts like that that can challenge you to think like, what kind of dichotomy do we assimilate these concepts of characters or archetypes into that fit like a what kind of animal are you quiz, to put it very normy. Like, I think that it's also enveloped in that whole concept of how do I look at myself, how do I look at others, and how does that all fit in with a storyline. Personally, the more female aspect of the fandom is very much on the hardcore end of like, I want to date Venom from the 2018 Venom movie. Do you know what he looks like? He's scary. And it's juxtaposed to a lot of more like monster theory, quote unquote, aspects within a lot of anime and video games and like Western film, with a trope that I learned about a few years ago called Born Sexy Yesterday, where it's like this woman who has cat ears and a tail and doesn't know anything about human society must be guided through the world by a cisgender white guy. Like that, I think that also deserves to be a part of the discussion when it comes to monster theory, because what do you consider a monster? In the more female side of that fandom, it's someone who feels the same as you do whenever you feel ostracized or othered or diminished. In the male side of that fandom, it's something that kind of deserves to be put in its place, that isn't quite human, but you could teach to be human. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you guys a question about cancel culture. And this is something that, Gianna, I think we definitely need to discuss more as like a solo episode of Artpop Talk. Yeah. This past week, we had a few TikTok friends. One in particular made a TikTok about Picasso and kind of this conversation about separating the art from the artist, and how does cancel culture work in the art world? Does it have a place? Like, is it actually helpful? So you guys have talked about this on your podcast, and I'm curious how you view cancel culture in these various microcosms, and how does cancel culture fit in, and again, should it fit in with all these visual elements, both in the nerd and artsy kind of realms?
Yeah, so it's tricky, because I feel like cancel culture absolutely should fit into what we do every day, but it's also, I mean, that term has kind of been co-opted by the shittiest people, and now instead of being literally anything dedicated to its meaning, it's instead just the liberals are taking over, and they won't even let me read Dr. Seuss. So what we mean when we say cancel culture, it is an umbrella term to describe the ability of grassroots social media movements to discredit abusers or other distastefully aligned individuals like celebrities who were previously untouchable. You know, a great way at looking at this is the Amber Heard situation. I think a better example would probably be the Harvey Weinstein stuff.
Yeah.
Because we can track that movement and its effects. You have all of these women and people who are coming out with allegations, and we see a lot of common through lines through them. There's a lot of commonalities, and the movement begins to build to such a pitch that Weinstein's film company is no longer getting as many movies to publish, and then you get an even bigger movement to the point where it actually turns into a legal movement.
Yeah, I think there's also a really interesting difference between things that should not happen and that are illegal and that physically, mentally harm people. I think some of that happens on another level, and not that quote unquote cancel culture can't aid in, you know, justice for people who have been harmed. But cancel culture is entering this other kind of ambiguous realm where maybe nothing is illegal and maybe words have hurt people, and how does cancel culture play into that when legality is and the justice system is kind of taken out of that context?
They allow us to highlight in our society what is actively hindering our progression. The word problematic gets tossed around a lot, and it's an important word. It's kind of, you know, people like to put it in air quotes, and shitty people, mind you, and put it in air quotes, be like, well, I'm problematic for saying this, but, you know, what it actually is problematic means it's hindering our progression as a society. It is not allowing us to move past prejudices that we have grown up with. It's not about the people so much as it is the behavior that we're trying to squelch. When it's cool to see people kind of taking back power from and getting a voice when they didn't used to have one.
I will say that there is a line to be drawn in certain areas, because like I'm a weeb, and I'm very active on Twitter, where we like to dump about anime. And particularly in anime Twitter at the moment, there's this very strange back and forth that I feel like surfaces in fandom every 15 years or so, where everybody suddenly becomes Puritans. And, like, you can't consume any media that's problematic for any reason whatsoever, or else you're an abuser. And that's, like, so strange that it's so prominent at the moment with young people. Like, younger than us. Like, teenagers, or very, very early 20s, sometimes as young as 13, 14, that are engaging in this media. And it blows my mind. Because, like, I couldn't imagine listening to that kind of student in a classroom whenever I had to read The Kite Runner in high school, that has a very graphic sexual assault scene in it and very graphic suicide attempt. And these same individuals are going online and saying that if you consume any kind of media that relates to this, you are just as bad as the characters or the individuals that are perpetrating this. And if you like a character that happens to be bad or happens to do something bad, then you are no better than an actual abuser. And it's very weird that that is so heavily focused at the moment. And it's less like on cancel culture about well-known figures, and it's much more about small-time artists and creators online. It's this weird goal to try and shove out anybody that's like over the age of 21 from a creative space under the guise of, well, this minor feels uncomfortable. Well, no, actually you were looking at explicit material when you're 15 that this artist put up lots of barriers so you could not access it, and you're mad that an adult is creating adult things that you forced yourself into whenever there were all of these gates up saying, hey, you're underage, you can't be here. And there's such a weird back and forth of, let's definitely address this when it comes to people with influence and kind of an authority on things, when it comes to like Weinstein and Seinfeld and lots of other individuals and household names. But when it comes to the little guys and the artists that are literally just trying to talk about, like, me and a good friend of mine now that are like, wow, Vegeta from Dragon Ball is pretty hot. And some 14-year-old wants to say, this is wrong and you guys are gross. No, I'm an adult. She's an adult. The character's an adult. Fuck off. Why do you have a problem with these different individuals engaging in any kind of problematic media? So I think cancel culture goes too far in certain areas whenever it comes to things like that, where people are equating, like, any kind of depiction of sexual assault in the context of a story arc as literal child abuse, tag FBI's Twitter, and then call you a pedophile. Like, you're not accomplishing anything here.
What we're seeing right now is the growing pains stage of this culture movement. We are experiencing a lot of aches and pains, which take place in the form of vindictive people abusing this want and need by society to improve, by either choosing to get things wrong or just accidentally getting it wrong. Sorry, Johnny Depp. And in other cases, we're seeing, these angry individuals who are, like Nebula said, trying to get random artists just Twitter blasted for making art that they want to make. And we're also experiencing the better parts of it. We're growing taller, and that's cool. But as we kind of move forward, this is a movement just like any other. It's another part of our culture that, given enough time, it will just kind of be absorbed into us. And eventually we will reach a stage where we as a people are just cognizant of what we say on a daily basis, which is a surprisingly hard thing to expect from people, I find. But
yeah, it's just like, I think at the bare minimum, cancel culture is just saying, don't be an asshole, call for change, do good things, treat people with kindness, learn about our histories. That's we're all working towards the same thing here, bud. But I think it's interesting, how it's evolving and how we're navigating that, what feels sometimes like a slippery slope. So it was interesting to hear you guys talk about it on the podcast, and I think that's something Gianna and I are similarly, and people in the arts are just grappling with in terms of art history. There are all these different kinds of conversations taking place, and it's on us as change makers and people, again, like Wooper said, who want to see that progression take place, who want the world to be a better place. How are we navigating the art world without completely erasing history? What does that mean? What does it mean to talk about problematic artists who aren't even here with us anymore? How do we explain and separate the art from the artists? And I think that's a really interesting question to keep asking of everyone. So
there's a really wonderful digital art piece that I've seen for years, and I think I sent it to you guys a couple months ago, but it's titled The Muse's Revenge, and it's set up, it's literally like a 1-for-1 scale of Pablo Picasso's studio with these big French doors open and like the wind blowing in the curtains, and it's a woman, like very young, obviously, in a white gown, holding a gun with who we presume to be Picasso lying dead on the floor, surrounded by paintings of her body. And I think that image alone is very powerful for like how we're advancing. Yes, this artwork has meaning and it has value in the world, but I think that value doesn't always have to be positive. It can also be an educational value of maybe don't be a dick.
Yeah.
And to see an artwork like that produced on a digital medium by a female artist, and to have that just echoed decades and decades later, is also important to keep in mind as we continue to move forward and continue to navigate those kinds of discussions.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we gotta ask you guys our final and favorite question. What would you put in your flux kit?
I gotta ask really quick, Wooper, do you know what a flux kit is?
Yeah.
Do you?
Why don't you tell them what you would put in yours?
I think that I would put a bunch of really weird shit that makes no sense, and those things are a violin bow with a lot of like broken strings, or broken hairs, I should say, kind of hanging down. A like gallon thing of fake blood that you would get from like a spirit Halloween, a bright sparkly pink Nerf gun, and a big old bottle of liquid eyeliner.
I like that. That's a good answer.
Thanks.
I think I would put in it mine. Okay, so like a lot of jelly. However much there is that could be in it, I would kind of use that as the metric and just sort of fill it up with the jelly. And so that way when one goes to open it, I presume after I'm dead, they because again, we all know what those are. When they open it, they get jelly on their hands, and that's your afternoon if that happens to you, you know? Probably submerged at the bottom of the jelly would probably be like one DVD copy of Shark Tale. It just kind of as a little reward for kind of having to deal with all that.
This is like getting pranked by art. This is some bullshit.
Oh, dude,
Yeah.
I'm actually here for it. I like this flux kit meets a time capsule, kind of posthumous, like art performance, and we'll never know if it takes place.
So now we know one thing that it's not, and that's important. We're getting context clues every day, guys, and that's really cool.
So the last thing, can you tell all of the Art Pop Tarts, strudels, and now Danishes where they can follow you? Is there anything else you want to plug before we let you go? Is there like one thing that you really want Art Pop Tarts to know and learn and understand about nerd culture?
It's not as scary or as like intimidating as people want to think it is. You can jump in at literally any point. You want to watch Howl's Moving Castle, an animated movie about a really beautiful novel? Do it. It's an anime. Get over it. It's 2 hours with a beautiful score, and no one's going to make fun of you for watching something like that in the privacy of your own home. You want to read a comic book? Read a comic book. And even if you think that maybe it's not for me, maybe it's not like what I want to tell my friends I'm into, do something that makes you happy and forget what other people are saying about it.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to achieve with our podcast as well. Like, we want people to feel accepted for who they are and for what they enjoy. And you're not different. You're not an outsider. you're not anything lesser than your peers for being interested in something that someone might not like.
Yeah, absolutely. The saying that I love is, you don't stop playing because you grow old. You grow old because you stop playing. So just remember that. Have fun. Watch a cartoon for once in your life, you dingus.
You can listen to our podcast, Wooper and Nebula's Nerdtastic Galaxy, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Deezer, Stitcher, and pretty much anywhere else that you want to listen. We have a Twitter and an Instagram. Our Instagram is at Nerdtastic Galaxy. Our Twitter is at Nerd, TASTC Galaxy. And we also have a Discord, so if you want to join our community, you can come hang out with us. Gianna and Bianca are in it. They just haven't poked their heads up yet. So
It is a
lurk.
thing
Yeah.
that exists. It's the dark web.
it's a community that we can all hang out in together and discuss art and nerd shit as friends.
That is going to be my goal. I am going to dip my toes into the Discord
Dip your
and
toes.
not be scared.
No,
Heck yeah.
don't be scared. We'll introduce you.
Well,
Okay, I'm excited.
Wooper, Nebula, thank you so much for being with us here today on APT. Thank you so much for just creating a safe space for your listeners to have these conversations and to investigate and delve in nerd culture, and have difficult conversations about fandom and nerd culture and how to challenge that and be involved in it, and doing that all on the dark web. So
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us as well. It's really
Yes.
nice that
This was
we
so
are
fun.
able to leverage our positions as friends of yours to kind of promote ourselves. It's really nice.
No, honestly, I just have a million more things to ask you guys about, so I just can't wait for the next time that you guys are on.
Or that you come on our show.
Yeah, absolutely. We would love to have you as well.
well, how the turntables.
Do a little switcheroo.
Little switcheroo.
Maybe we
Like
should
it.
just we should host a complete episode of Nerdtastic Galaxy, and then you guys should come host an episode of APT, and it would be like
I would love
a
that.
spontaneous switch, and the
That'd be
listeners
so
won't know.
fun.
Can you imagine
We
how
don't
funny
announce it.
would be if we especially took over Nerdtastic, their Discord, and it was just a hot mess?
Yes,
Do you-
please do. I
do you
guarantee
like
you
Urt?
no one will notice.
Do you like
I
Urt?
also what if you did an episode of Nerdtastic Galaxy, but you kept referring to yourselves as Wooper and Nebula the whole time? And if we did Artpop Talk, we would just keep saying like, "Oh, Gianna, what do you think?" Like, "Hi there, I'm Bianca. This is what I think." Like, and just didn't really.
I'm Nebula. I
discuss
call
it.
it. I aspire to be Nebula.
No, I
She's my
definitely
rock
want to be
star.
Wooper.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say I definitely want to be Wooper.
Okay.
I serve the role of Chaos Goblin on our show, so
Let me just switch into my Chaos Goblin
Bianca, you
uniform.
don't need to switch into a Chaos Goblin vibe. You are Chaos Goblin. Makes sense.
I'm here to serve.
All right, my delicious pastries. Thank you so much for being here today, and we will talk to you all on Tuesday.
Bye, everyone.
bye.
Bye.
Artpop Talk's production assistant is Audrey Kaminsky. Music and sounds by Josh Turner. Photography is by Adrian Turner. And our graphic designer is Sid Hammond.